So our next investigator is Jeff Morgan. Jeff Morgan is an MA candidate in the Department of Geography at Simon Fraser University, where he conducts international health services research. Jeff also volunteers with Health Initiative for Men and started participating with the investigators just last year. Currently, he is joining us from Barbados, where he is spending his summer semester abroad. Jeffrey misses his friends and fellow investigators very much. In his words, but let's be real, it's warmer and sunnier there, and the water is literally turquoise.
Hello. Okay, can I get started? Thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to start. I have 10 minutes, so this is going to be the fastest presentation you've ever heard. Hello from cyberspace. My name is Jeff Morgan, and this is my presentation on PrEP in SexNow. So I chose to focus on PrEP because, as far as I was concerned, it was really all anyone was talking about. My social media feed was, and really still is, exploding with discussion around PrEP and its effectiveness, its availability, and its usefulness. I found PrEP was this really uniting and polarizing force. And I was seeing these really interesting and nuanced conversations around health equity and access being had. Particularly, I was seeing conversations around who can afford PrEP. It remains very expensive and inaccessible to the vast majority of Canadians, and I was interested to see if these ideas of access and interest played out in the data. Furthermore, the 2015 SexNow survey was the first time that we asked questions about PrEP knowledge, PrEP likeliness to use, and as some HIV mitigation strategy and the willingness to pay for PrEP. And I was interested to see if the knowledge information about PrEP so passionately held by my peers and my friends translated to the wider gay and bi communities. And also how knowledge and interest differed between demographics and population variables. So this led me to my two research questions, which is one, what is the level of knowledge around PrEP among gay and bi guys? And two, how does this knowledge and interest differ between various demographics and population variables? And I think these are two very useful and worthwhile research questions because as guys and health organizations start to use PrEP, it's important to have some sort of baseline understanding of who knows what, who's interested, and what populations might need additional or supplemental information. So really quickly, some background, some well-known background in this room especially. According to Katie, which is an HIV and Hep C information website or an organization, PrEP, or pre-exposure prophylaxis, is a way for an HIV-negative person to reduce their risk of becoming infected with HIV and involves taking anti-HIV drugs on a regular basis. On February 23, 2016, Health Canada quietly revised the product monograph for Truvada, authorizing its use for PrEP, and a Daily Extra confirmed this with a statement from Health Canada. So this both kind of emphasizes the importance of conducting research on PrEP right now as it becomes available for guys in Canada, while also highlighting this huge limitation in our study as our data collected before this announcement and before its subsequent media buzz. So it'll be really interesting to revisit these questions around PrEP in the future SexNow surveys to see how this may have changed. So this project also attempts to build on similar research, in particular research from the Momentum study in a paper published in 2016 by Lachowski et al. Their data was collected in 2012, 2014, and I used this publication as a way to as a jumping off point and to identify relevant demographics and variables, and I'll compare my findings to these findings kind of throughout and later on in my presentation. So really quickly, as a brief overview, I did exclude HIV positive guys from my analysis. Right off the bat, we see that the majority of guys, about 55%, know about PrEP. This knowledge was much higher among HIV positive guys. About 50% were interested in PrEP, and only about 7% stated that they were likely to use it in the next 12 months, although we have to remember that this is before it was even approved in Canada. In regards to willingness to pay, we see that the vast majority, 72%, are unwilling to pay for PrEP out of pocket. Of those guys who are willing to pay, most draw the line at $200 a month, but the vast majority draw the line at $100 a month. just as some context, HIM estimates that the cost of PrEP out of pocket can exceed $900 a month, and few insurance companies currently cover PrEP. In fact, we just saw a few weeks ago a major insurance provider just drop PrEP from its approved list of medications. Just a quick shout out, it's important to note that Joshua Edwards with HIM has written very thoughtfully about accessing PrEP through alternative streams, like importing it through the US, which could reduce the costs. So the first population variable I looked at was sexual orientation, and found that PrEP awareness was much higher among gay guys when compared to bi guys. Bi guys were also much less likely to use PrEP in the next 12 months. However, what's interesting is once informed about PrEP in the SexNow survey, bi guys are nearly equally as interested in PrEP. And what we can take away from this is perhaps future efforts to promote PrEP should also target bi guys specifically, because as it is, these messages seem to not be coming through as clearly. In regards to education, I found that people with a bachelor's degree are more likely to be PrEP aware, although less likely to be interested in using PrEP. Oddly, despite being less interested, they were also more likely to use PrEP. So this could come down to some sort of cost situation, as people in bachelor's degrees perhaps made more money and could perhaps purchase PrEP. So this finding is also important because educational attainment is a risk indicator for HIV. Just really quickly looking at age, we found that younger men tended to be more PrEP aware compared to older men. This was contradictory to the Momentum study, which actually found that older guys were more PrEP aware than younger guys. Interest and likely to use were not statistically significant. So where we really start to see some really large variation in PrEP knowledge was in regards to number of sexual partners. We saw that guys with more than 5 sexual partners a year were much more interested in PrEP, knew much more about PrEP, and were much more likely to use PrEP in the next 12 months. So that's really good to see, because we know that, again, a high number of sexual partners is a risk indicator for HIV and definitely would be a target demographic for PrEP. Finally, just rolling through these here. I included HIV test because originally I had made a mistake in my analysis. I had originally excluded guys who had never taken an HIV test from my analysis, and rightfully corrected that. But when I did correct it, I found that my results changed dramatically. The overall PrEP knowledge just decreased. So I had a suspicion that guys who had never taken an HIV test were a lot less PrEP aware, which turned out to be true here. They were significantly less PrEP aware, they're significantly less interested in PrEP, and significantly less likely to use PrEP. And I use this kind of as a measure of how engaged participants were in the healthcare system. So what we can take away from this is really how can we reach out to those guys that may find PrEP useful but are operating outside of our healthcare system. So looking at geography, we see that BC, Quebec, and Ontario had the highest level of knowledge around PrEP, respectively. Meanwhile, Manitoba had the lowest PrEP knowledge, about 10% below the national average, and the question marks indicate provinces or territories that didn't have enough statistical power. Manitoba could have something to do with age. Respondents there tended to be older than the rest of the provinces, so maybe that accounts for their lower PrEP knowledge. However, interestingly, when we look at PrEP interest, we kind of see this reversal where BC, Quebec, and Ontario are least interested in PrEP despite being most knowledgeable about PrEP. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. And all these geographic variables point to areas in the country where national PrEP efforts could be targeted. Finally, looking at income and willingness to pay. In regards to knowledge or interest or likeliness to use PrEP, there was no statistical significance or variation between income groups. Unsurprisingly, however, when we look at willingness to pay out of pocket, we find that guys who earned less than $50,000 a year were much more likely to use PrEP only if it was covered by insurance. The bar graph down here shows that as your income increases, the more you're willing to pay out of pocket, and the more you're willing to pay more than $100 a month. And this kind of brings us back to this question of equity. As it is right now, PrEP is really only available to a relatively privileged section of the population with the financial means or the really good insurance necessary to access PrEP. So we did it. Fastest presentation ever. Conclusions. Found that 1.2% of guys in our survey, about 91 of them, had taken PrEP. On average, 55% of guys were PrEP aware. Bi guys were least likely to be PrEP aware, as well as guys who had never taken an HIV test. Interest in PrEP varied between 40 and 55%. It varied between provinces and between population variables. And most guys were unwilling to pay for PrEP out of pocket. Just reflecting really quickly back to the Momentum study, both surveys found that guys with higher number of sexual partners were more PrEP aware, which is great. Although our survey found that guys tend to be much more PrEP aware in general, about 50% compared to 20% found in the Momentum study. And all this, I think, really shows is how quickly information regarding PrEP is spreading among gay and bi guys, as well as maybe a reflection of our very large sample size. And whew, done. Thank you for listening.